So the first thing we need is a springform pan. So springform pans now come in almost every shape and size. From I've seen hearts, rectangles, you name it, huge. Usually they're round, and this one was $7.99 at a local like a restaurant supply store. This one was a little bit more on Amazon because it has a glass bottom and a silicone ring. But mostly they're about 9 inches. They could be 8. They could come in all different sizes. You can get little ones. So what's neat about them is that when you stick them in the freezer and then the ring comes off, and then you have this to serve on. So again, remember, I don't like to do dishes. So one of the things I do, and you don't have to do this, is if you want, you can take a piece of parchment paper. You have to lower it. And you place it on the bottom. And so that when you put the ring on, now not only will it not stick, but it won't anyway, is now I have one less thing to wash. So I have my base. So the first thing I'm going to do is make my crust. And remember, you can substitute a different nut or seed for a nut. Just make sure it's not roasted and it's unsalted. Or you can substitute oats, or you can do a combination of nut and oat. But I tend, when I'm using nuts, to use the walnut the most, because those that feel we have to have nuts always talk about how heart healthy the walnut is, high in omega-3 fatty acids, but you could use other nuts. They tend to be like less expensive than, say, using things like cashews, macadamia nuts, and pistachios. So we're going to place this in the food processor, and we're going to add our cocoa powder. Now, you can use cocoa powder, you can use carob powder, roasted carob powder, cacao powder. You can see that there's a difference in color between cocoa powders. You don't have to, we are going to use this in one recipe. If money is no object, the best cocoa powder I've ever had was Valrhona. It's from France. It's $22 a pound. Like, this little thing was like $10. It's very expensive. So I tend to just use the more affordable ones, like this one from Trader Joe's, which was just a couple, I think it was $1.99. Or even Hershey's has a wonderful dark cocoa powder that they have at Walmart and Winco and all those kind of places. But you can see that there's a color difference between this and some of the finer brands that are darker. But most people love chocolate so much they don't really complain, regardless of which one you're using. So we are going to take our 2 ingredients. Also, there was a little bit of vanilla powder in there, the vanilla bean powder. So I forgot to measure out my Decadent ore for this one. So I have some pitted medjool handy. So I'll use those. Even though they say they're pitted, I am still going to press each one, removing this little stem at the end, because believe it or not, it's not perfect with pitted dates. They often do have pits in them. And what the pit can do is it can totally damage your food processor blade. You kind of know that it's ready when your food processor starts to slow down. And again, using the same technique we used before, smush it in your hand, break point, perfect. When you think about it, I used to know how to make pie crust with the technique with the flour and the ice cubes. It takes forever. This takes no time at all. Place it in your hand and then just press down with the palm and the heel of your hand. So this doesn't have to be perfect because it's going to be covered. So you press this in and there's our crust. No baking required. So I've got my crust, and so now I have to make my filling. And so I have more walnuts. And again, you could use walnut butter, but that's going to be a lot more expensive. So I'm just going to grind these into an almost nut butter consistency. It doesn't have to be perfect because it just works even as long as it's ground. So when I used to make this back in the day, I used to grind it all the way into a nut butter, and it took like 5 minutes. And then one day, I forget the reason, I just said, is it really necessary? And I just ground it into this consistency, which is more like breadcrumbs. And it still works, and you just save a lot of time. So now I'm going to make my date paste. So all date paste is dates plus a liquid. And you want to make sure you soak it in the liquid several hours, maybe even overnight. If you're in a hurry, you can make date paste in a pressure cooker or use boiling water. So the liquid varies depending on the recipe. Since this is an orange chocolate mousse torte, I want a subtle orange flavoring in it. So I soaked it in unsweetened orange juice, which I bought, but you can make yourself. Some people don't like the orange flavor. So when I've had custom orders, I've used cherry juice unsweetened. I've used pomegranate juice, or I've just used water if people want it just straight up chocolate mousse torte. And sometimes I've even added mint to make it a mint chocolate mousse torte. So I'm going to pour this into the food processor. Now, when you soak the dates, whether it's in orange juice or any liquid, people think they throw the soak water out. Well, that's not a good idea. One, you're going to have a much harder time processing it. And two, you've been soaking it. So now all the sweetness, all the natural sugars are in the liquid. So never throw out your soak water. So to my date paste now, I'm going to add my cocoa powder and some unsweetened coconut. If you don't do coconut, that's okay. Just leave it out. Process again. And now we're going to add our nuts back in, our ground nuts. And basically we're done. Now, of course, this has to set up in the freezer. And texturally, it's not going to get rock hard in the freezer. So I recommend you not only set it up in the freezer, but serve it frozen. Maybe take it out, 10 minutes before you plan to eat it, or maybe cut it, because you don't want to keep this in the refrigerator or at room temperature. It's not that it will melt, it just won't be the ideal temperature. So we're just going to smooth this over the top. This is so much easier to smooth with because the beveledness. So I would much prefer to use that. And we're going to just smooth it out. And so now we're going to decorate the top. And there's a couple of ways you can do that. One of the things I like to do is just put a little bit of unsweetened coconut because it makes it pretty. I like to use the reduced fat coconut because instead of having 220 calories for a quarter cup, it has 70, and it has about a third as much, 2/3 less fat. So traditional coconut will have 21 grams of fat for a quarter cup. This has 7. But again, I'm not really using it in a discernible amount. I'm just sprinkling it, just trying to get it a little bit covered. And then what I'm going to do is this will also give it a nice crunch and also look pretty, is I'm going to take my organic unsweetened, because these also come with sugar, cacao nibs, and just sprinkle them over the top. And that just kind of makes it look pretty. And then I'm going to actually stick this in the freezer. And there you have it, the beautiful whole food, no processed food, orange chocolate mousse torte.